Joaquin Buckley is taking on Kamaru Usman this weekend at the UFC Atlanta Fight Night. And in this video, I'm going to be breaking down this fight as well as providing some analysis and commentary on who I think is going to win. Which I must first off and say, I am such a big Joaquin Buckley fan. Okay, I remember watching him when he first made the move down to welterweight. Obviously, when he first got into the UFC, I think it was in his second fight when he got that absolutely fantastic viral KO. But his career was kind of going up and down. He was losing some fights, winning some fights. It kind of got knocked out. He got knocked out by Kevin Holland at middleweight. He kind of had some misdirections, at middleweight. And then he decides to make the cut down to welterweight. And ever since then, he's been on a absolute tear, a 5-fight win streak in the welterweight division that I have loved watching. He fought 4 times in 2024. I had the pleasure to watch every single one of those fights. And I picked him in every single one of those fights, and he won. And I say all this not only just to hype up Buckley, but also just to pre-establish that I am such a big Buckley fan. And I think not only is he going to win this fight, I think that we're about to see a Joaquin Buckley masterclass. Kamaru Usman, right? I think that Usman is the second greatest welterweight of all time. And I don't think that's really a hot take to have. I think that's a pretty common take that a lot of people have. I think Kamaru Usman, with his title reign, with his win streak he had, his 15-fight win streak in the UFC, he is a legend of the game. I will give him complete credit for that. But I think in this matchup against Joaquin Buckley, there's too much going against it for him. The first thing I'm going to bring up is his knees, right? And I understand this is a little bit of a meme in the UFC community right now, right? I get it, right? But when your boy sitting next to you, Corey Sandhagen, just slaps your knee and it's enough for you to wince out in pain, dude, all I'm saying is a couple of oblique kicks in round 1, and I think that the entire fight could change in Joaquin Buckley's favor. Even stories of Kamaru Usman having to walk up the stairs backwards, him not being able to walk on concrete because his knees are so shot out so bad. So for me, when I see this and I hear about this, to try and vouch for Kamaru Usman when is very difficult. When you have somebody that is physically prominent in the welterweight division as Joaquin Buckley. Even in his fight against Covington, Buckley's fight against Covington, Covington was always kind of seen as this wrestler, this bigger guy in the welterweight division, this more, physical guy. And don't get me wrong, he was able to get a few takedowns, but the physicality in that fight really came from Buckley. Buckley has this size, he has this reach. Obviously he's a former middleweight, so that does kind of play into things as well. It just, when you think about Usman's knees, I think that's going to play such a big factor in this fight. Secondly, his age. Kamaru Usman is 38 years old. He's an older gentleman. He's an older guy, and I think if you look at just the old guard of the welterweight division, I think I saw the statistic online where if you took the top 7 people, including the champion Kamaru Usman, of the welterweight division in March 2021, they're on something like a 23-fight losing streak. None of them have won a fight since then, or all of them are on this massive losing streaks within their own respect, which is crazy to see. And I don't think that Usman's going to be an exception to that. And I understand, yes, he was a champion. He had this rule. He was, he looked like he was unstoppable. He was number 1 pound for pound in the world at one point. But there's just certain things, even if you look at his second fight against Leon Edwards, obviously kind of looking at where Leon is now, Leon's career has completely fallen off ever since the Sean Brady matchup. Even between the Bilal Muhammad and the Sean Brady matchup, I remember when Leon was at the height of his game. I remember when people were talking, bruh, get Islam Makhachev in here. He's gonna, Edwards is gonna kick Makhachev's ass. You know what I'm saying? Like, he was at a high point in his career, and I think a big part of that was, obviously he got the miracle head kick, but he also beat Usman via decision, right? And what I see in that is that, you kind of take the luck factor out of things in that second fight. It's a more even matchup between the two of them. And of course you can look towards the Khamzat Chimaev fight as well, which, I don't want to talk too much on that specifically because that fight was at middleweight, which I think poses, some different standards than what this fight would be. And so looking at Usman's last welterweight matchup, when I think about a guy like Buckley, a guy that's going to charge forward at you, a guy that's not afraid to throw, a guy that's very physical versus somebody like Leon Edwards, who's, point striker. He's kind of timid. He's only going to throw, a shot if he thinks it's going to land, and seeing what he was able to do to Usman in that second fight. Not to mention the fact that, I do think that there is a chance that Usman could get knocked out in this fight as well. Obviously, like I said, there was the miracle head kick that knocked him out. The only knockout loss he has in his career. But I just think it's been a long time since Usman's been in there with somebody that's as physical and as dominant of a striker as Buckley is. I think that poses a very, very big threat to Usman. I could see Usman getting dropped in this fight. And I know I've kind of went on a lot about the negatives of Usman in his game. I think there are some positives. Obviously, there's that experience in a 5-rounder. Buckley, up until this point in his career, obviously he had the one fight against Covington. They got stopped just before the 3rd round ended. So Buckley's never gone 5 rounds. I wouldn't necessarily find cardio an issue for Buckley because we haven't really seen that in the past, but I think, Usman does have the edge in the fact that he has that experience for 5-round fights. Usman's been the who's who. He's fought the who's who. He's been in the spotlight before. He's gone, full 5 rounds many, many times with opponents before. He's used to that spotlight, whereas for Buckley, this is his first time, going that far. So maybe in the later rounds, I could maybe see a potential cardio issue for Buckley, but I feel like he's probably smart enough, A, to know that, and B, to game plan for that in advance. And Buckley's kind of this fighter, what we've seen in 3-round fights, we kind of see him start to pick up the pace a little bit, kind of, have the fight roll in his favor in the later rounds. Look at the Stephen Wonderboy Thompson fight, right? Buckley was arguably down 2-0 in that fight before he landed that knockout. And I think, obviously you look at that fight and go, Buckley was down. It kind of, people could kind of, compare it to the Burns JDM fight. JDM was losing that fight, but then he just got a lucky KO. People kind of say the same about Buckley. He was losing that fight and he got the KO. Whereas I kind of beg to differ. I think that Buckley had a very smart game plan going into that fight where, he was mixing up, he was doing level changes, threatening the takedown, which, ended up leading to that KO. So even though he was down, there was a game plan in mind that, eventually, did cause him to win, right? So, with all that being said, between the age, the physical capacity of Kamaru, I am picking Buckley in this fight. I think the only way that Usman could win would be to, being able to, the thing is, Usman is still a big guy for the division, so maybe there's a chance that he can kind of out-physical Buckley and kind of win a decision, but I just don't see it happening. And I hope that if Usman decides to, if Usman loses here, I hope he decides to retire after this fight, because I'd hate to see, somebody like him, I'm not saying I'm that big of an Usman fan, I'm really not, but I'd hate to see a guy like him that has such a huge legacy in this sport, someone that's arguably a top 15 fighter of all time, second greatest in his division, to go on horrible losing streak, to kind of have like an Anderson Silva end to his career. I'd hate to see that happen to him. So my hope is that if he ends up losing this matchup, that he just decides to retire. But let me know what you guys think of think about this fight in the comment sections below. My final take, my final verdict is I'm saying Buckley, round 4, TKO via ground and pound. That's what I'm going with here. So let me know if you guys agree or if you disagree in the comment section down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this fight, as well as who you think is going to win. And make sure to like and subscribe. I hope you have a wonderful day.